What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my early thoughts ahead of Game Week 12. In this case, very early thoughts because obviously we're in an international break, but I still want to talk about some key players and go through some of my notes from the weekend. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. So let's start with BRUNO Fernandes, who went up in price last night from 8.3 to 8.4 million. So he's getting close to that starting price of 8.5 million. And 27 points in 2 game weeks are definitely going to help with those transfers in. I spoke yesterday on the Wildcard 12 video that if I was wildcarding this week, I'd probably go for BRUNO. If you've got him, of course, you're not going to sell him. The key question is, should you be using a transfer to bring him in ahead of Ipswich away in game week 12 and Everton at home in game week 13? My general view would be, if you're keeping him for the long term, it's a good transfer in. If you're going to sell him for Arsenal away in game week 14, I think that's too short term, and I would just go for whoever you want for the long term instead. There's not a huge amount of players where they're so bad for 12 and 13 that you should avoid them, transfer Fernandes in just to transfer him back out in a few game weeks' time. I said this last week for Saka in game week 11, that if your plan was to go to BRUNO and then Saka later, I'd probably go straight to Saka, and I appreciate that really did not work out very well in game week 11, but the point would still stand. If Saka's fit and available and we've got that information, I would just go straight to Saka in 12 rather than get Fernandes just to transfer him out in game week 14. So that would be my general view. In terms of him as a long-term pick, that Arsenal game in 14 and then City away in 16 are pretty bad, right? They're not fixtures you'd want for any attacker. But outside of that, I think the fixture run for Man United is pretty good. Like, someone commented on the video, I think, or tweeted me this morning, which I saw, and said that, you know, the fixture run's not good because Forest are home in 15 and Bournemouth are home in 17. But let's be realistic, right? If you've got BRUNO Fernandes for those 2 games, you're not worried. Like, Nottingham Forest defensive stats have been really good this season, but that's also the same team that just conceded 3 goals to Newcastle in game week 11. And I think the XG for Newcastle wasn't that bad. Yeah, Forest conceded 1.7 expected goals. Now, that hasn't been something they've done very regularly this season. If you've got BRUNO at home to Forest, you're not worried about it, right? Similar with Bournemouth in game week 17. Bournemouth just conceded 3 goals away to Brentford. Man United are fully capable of doing something similar. Then you've got Wolves away in 18, which is pretty good. Newcastle at home in 19, not terrible. Liverpool away in 20 is bad. But then it's Southampton at home, Brighton at home, Fulham away, and Palace at home. So I'm basically looking at this thinking, you can keep Fernandes if you buy him now, right through Christmas. And once you get to January, okay, Liverpool's bad, but then you've got that great fixture run afterwards. You're probably going to hold on to him for that. So that would basically be my view with BRUNO. If it's a long-term move, good. If it's short-term, I'm just not sure it's worth the extra transfers. Now, is it worth bringing someone in that's got Arsenal and City away in the next 5? Possibly. It depends who your alternatives are. And also, if you've got 7 other good attackers, you could bench BRUNO in those games if you think they're that bad for him. Like, it wouldn't be necessarily the worst call to make. But I think there's some value in the fact that when you get into December, there's extra fixtures. And of course, BRUNO is not immune from getting injured, but it very, very rarely happens. He also plays 90 minutes every single game. That is valuable over this December period. I just really like him. And I want to just not contradict myself here. For weeks, I've kind of been saying that when I get to 13 or 14, this might be the time to sell BRUNO to get Saka. But things have changed for me. And the things that have changed is Trent Alexander-Arnold getting an injury. Once I sell him, I've got a lot of money to spend. All of a sudden, I don't need to sell BRUNO to get Saka. I could sell Mbeumo instead. And Mbeumo's great, by the way, but I think I'd rather have Fernandes for the long term if it's a choice between the 2. Or, if I'm prepared to sell Solanke, I could even sell Rodgers to get Saka. So I've got lots of options that have now opened up to me, and I'm probably going to look to keep BRUNO. And let's make it clear, right? He's not suddenly essential. He's not going to go and get 27 points for the next 2 game weeks or anything like that. But I think he is more of a consistent player than he's shown so far. Like, he's only got 2 goals, 4 assists so far this season. You know, the first 8-9 game weeks were not great. The last 2 have been amazing. The reality of the kind of FPL pick he is probably somewhere in between. Like, 10 goals, 9 assists last year is not really anything compared to Salah, Palmer and Saka. But he's also not their price. Right, he's 8.4 million, and that's a return every other game. And I think he is capable of doing more than that as well. Obviously, the other thing to factor in is Amorim is now Man United boss, so we don't know what setup he's going to use, where players will fit in, it's possible that Bruno Fernandes might play a deeper role, but I think that's really unlikely. Bruno is Man United's best attacker. If you've got Højlund as a number 9 and you're going to ask him to make runs, you need someone to thread the ball through. Bruno Fernandes is the player you ask to do that. You want him close. And his expected goals have been decent this year. 0.31 per 90 is not that bad. He's getting into good positions. He's had more goal threat than assist threat this season. I think that would probably change under Amorim, but I just don't see him playing in a deeper role. I think he has to play an attacking one. So I really like him as a transfer in. I think if you're on like Trent Alexander-Arnold like I was, it makes it a lot easier to hold him. Yes, 14 and 16 are not great, but I think as a long-term pick, he's decent. And if you're prepared to hold him for the long term, bring him in. If you're going to sell him soon, I just wouldn't bother. I'd just go for whoever you want for the long term instead. So let's talk about João Pedro next. Back with the bang in game week 11. Off the bench against Man City, the guy goes and gets a goal and an assist to help Brighton win the game. Really good performance in the limited minutes that he got. And at 5.4 million, he's potentially one of, if not the best value pick in FPL this season. Now, he's going to get talked about a lot over the international break, and I've already seen some comments saying he's only just back from injury. There's a lot of Brighton attackers competing for spaces in that first 11. Just chill out a little bit on João Pedro. He's not absolutely essential, and I do get that viewpoint, but it's really difficult not to think about what those extra funds could be used for if you bring him in. Because 5.4 million is a ridiculous price. Brighton are a very good attacking team. João Pedro is almost certainly first choice penalty taker. And I think there is a chance that he gets pretty decent minutes going forward. Can I sit here and guarantee that he will start against Bournemouth away in 12, given that he's had one appearance off the bench since he came back from injury? No, but I think there's a pretty good chance. And then from 13 onwards, once he's got himself back fit, that's such a good fixture run. Southampton at home, Fulham away, Leicester away, Palace at home, West Ham at home. Not as good as it gets, but really not that far off. And the thing that makes me confident that he's going to get decent minutes is what Hertzler said about him. So FPL Instinctive on Twitter tweeted about this, and this is what he said. Yeah, he makes a difference. I think every Premier League club has this one player who makes the special things, and I think he's exactly that player for us. And he's not only a great player, he's also a great leader. You know, I think we underestimate him a little bit regarding leader skills. He's a great leader. He's very demanding. He demands a lot from his teammates. He always sets the standards really high, and I think he's a big role model for all the young players. That's pretty good praise. Now, I will say, it's not out of the ordinary for managers to praise their own players. They want to keep them happy. They want to get them playing well. But I think the fact that he has said this, and he said it before as well, that he's that one player that does the special things means when he's fully fit, he's going to be in that team more often than not. Like, I know this is not necessarily the most brilliant example of something similar, but you look at Liverpool, right? Nunez and Jota get rotated a little bit. Diaz and Gakpo get rotated a bit on the left. You know who never gets rotated? Salah. And João Pedro could just be Brighton's Mo Salah. Not obviously at the same level, but in that if he's fit, they're going to want him in that team more often than not. And at 5.4 million, it's a very small risk you're taking. So as you can tell, I'm pretty high on him. I massively regret bringing in Strand Larsen last week. Obviously, there's hindsight with that because he blanked. But if I'd rolled the transfer, I could have just used that to get João Pedro in this week or next instead. So I will be looking to bring him in at some point. I don't know how quickly it will be. In terms of the other options, there are a ton of attackers, right, for Brighton. So, for example, you've got Minter when he's back fit, Adingra, and Rutter that can all play on the right. If Rutter's not playing on the right because Adingra is there, Rutter can play 10, so can João Pedro. João Pedro can play 9, so can Welbeck. So there is a bit of, I guess, congestion with the amount of players they've got for the amount of positions there are to play. But I think it's encouraging for the first 3 games when he was fit that he played 90 minutes in 2 and 3, and Welbeck went off. So Welbeck played really well, and he's got back-to-back 90 minutes. But earlier on in the season, he was coming off a bit earlier, and João Pedro was moving into that number 9 spot. So he was starting as the 10 and then getting moved to stay on the pitch. And I think that's something that can happen when he's got that fitness back up. It might not be there for game week 12. Hertzler has said in the past that he won't risk players, but from 13 onwards, it looks pretty good. And it might be that, yes, Rutter was a big signing, but he either plays on the right or misses out because João Pedro's fit. Like, ultimately, you need a squad of players, right, for when injuries happen. I think João Pedro is going to be first choice. Simple as that. Do I think he's going to start every game? Like, I do want to temper expectations a little bit. Not necessarily. You've got that midweek fixture in 14. The nice thing for Brighton is they play Saturday in game week 12, Friday in game week 13, and then not till Thursday in game week 14. So that's quite a long turnaround. The only issue is they then play Sunday straight after 14. So I think game week 15 is where you could see... Game week 14 or 15 is where you could see a bit of rotation, and maybe João Pedro misses out. But if I could guarantee you he's going to play Bournemouth away, Southampton at home, one of Fulham away or Leicester away, and then probably be back in the team for Palace, for 5.4 million, that's still really good value. So, yeah, I always feel like with picks like this, they're going to get built up quite a lot, especially over a break. It's always worth tempering those expectations. Rotation is possible. He might not be fully fit right now. There are midweek games coming up. He's probably not going to play 90 minutes in all those matches, but it's still a ridiculous price, and I'm still really regretting not just waiting for him. Maybe it was a massive mistake, I don't know, but that fixture run's just too good to turn down. So if you want to buy him, especially if you've got like a Calvert-Lewin or someone like that, I think he looks pretty good. But of course, wait until closer to the deadline to get more information. Even if he goes up to 5.5 or 5.6, he's still going to be really good value. So for forwards, only Visser and Cunha have had more transfers in this week than Alexander Isak, and it does look like a pretty good week to think about bringing him into your FPL squad, because West Ham at home on paper is such a good fixture right now. At the time of recording, Lopetegui is still manager. I'm not sure whether they're going to get rid of him over the break, but that defence has been so open all season, and I'm just not sure that's going to be fixed by the time we get to game week 12, and it's at home for Newcastle as well. Palace away in 13, not an amazing fixture, but not the worst time to play them right now either. Liverpool at home in 14 is tough. Then it's Brentford away, Leicester at home, Ipswich away. That is a really good run for Newcastle. And Isak is somewhat of a differential. I'm not saying he's so low owned that nobody owns him, but he's not going to be in a huge amount of teams. And although he's the third most transferred in forward, it's still only just over 100,000 transfers so far. I just think the 8.4 million price point makes him a little bit difficult for some people to get to in one move. And so if you can do that before everyone else brings him in, this does look like a nice week to do it. He's in a good bit of form as well. It's 3 goals in 3 games, plus an assist against Forest as well. Goal against Chelsea, goal against Arsenal. The season started pretty slow for him, right? A lot of us captained him in game week 1 against Southampton. Didn't go well. Only got 1 goal in the next 4 games, then got injured. But we know the quality of player that he is. Newcastle are a fairly strong attacking team. He's on penalties as well. The minutes look secure. I don't see a huge issue with his minutes over the next few games. Callum Wilson is a player that people always think about when they're considering Isak, and it's worth looking at the other options a team has. He's not played all season, so the chance of him coming back in and taking significant minutes off Isak are low, and we already know that Isak is miles ahead in the pecking order for that number 9 spot as well. And also, by the way, look, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday turnaround is not perfect, but the midweek game is Liverpool. He's not going to miss that. I think there's every chance he plays all of these games, but if Eddie Howe has the chance to sub him off early, then maybe he will take that. I think Isak is one of those players that we have some concerns about his fitness, and the fact that he's already had an injury this season kind of plays into that as well, but he did start 27 times last year. When he's fit and available, he will play pretty much every single game. I think it's fair to be cautious over December with Isak, but I think the potential for him as an upside pick is definitely there. Like, he doesn't have the 4 yellow card situation like Nicholas Jackson. He's currently on 0 for the season, so he's not getting suspended anytime soon unless he gets sent off. I don't mind Kai Havertz because Arsenal's fixtures turn, but if you can get Saka in double defence, I prefer that. And Watkins is even more expensive, and he's got Champions League to contend with as well. So I think Isak's a really good pick. Will I be putting him into my own team? I'll talk about that tomorrow. A lot depends on what other moves I want to make in terms of bringing players in, but also who I want to sell, whether there's enough money to go around. But I'm tempted. If I can get him in 12 easily and it doesn't impact other moves, I think he's a really good differential. I have a bad feeling that for my team, I'm just going to have to go without him. Like, that's just the way it is. I've got other moves to make. But if I could get him for free, I probably would. And even on wildcard, I would consider putting him in. You've got to give up like a Fernandes or an Mbeumo, but he could be worth it. So, yeah, if you're looking at him and you've got the money, you can do the move easily. This is a great time to buy him. So I spoke about this on Sunday's stream. For me, the most frustrating FPL thing to happen in game week 11 was Trent Alexander-Arnold going off with an injury, because Liverpool ended up getting the clean sheet in that game. He was starting to become a bit of a differential. I'd made moves to be able to keep him in my squad, especially with Southampton away in 12, and now he's quite likely to miss that game. So obviously, if you don't own Trent, you're not buying him. If you're on wildcard, you're definitely not including him. What do people that own him do moving forward, and who do they transfer in instead? Now, the first reports that have come out have said that it's not a major issue. It's a hamstring problem, but because he came off early, he hasn't done any serious damage that's going to keep him out for a while. He might even be back for Southampton away in game week 12, which sounds nice in theory, but if you look at Liverpool's fixture schedule, they've got that game against Southampton on Sunday. Then they play Real Madrid in the Champions League midweek, and then it's the Man City game on the weekend. And obviously they are two huge matches. Now, we've known those matches were after Southampton for a while, but when Trent was fully fit, I expected him to play against Southampton, maybe get subbed off early after the international break, and then probably play Real Madrid and City as well. I think coming off the back of a hamstring issue, there is almost no chance they will risk him for that game. You can play Conor Bradley against Southampton away, still get the win, and save Trent for those two bigger important matches. I think the most we get out of Trent is an appearance off the bench. And originally my plan was to bench Trent in game week 13 and then probably play him from 14 onwards. So I could still just do that, right? Bench him for Southampton, bench him for City. But benching him for City was fine when you were also getting the Southampton game, which was such a good fixture. Not getting that and then having City and then even Newcastle away in 14 suddenly doesn't look quite so good. I think it's just really difficult to hold a £7 million defender when he's missing that match. The frustrating thing for me, apart from the fact he came off, is that the fixtures long term I think are pretty good. And as I've said for a while, Liverpool defence is just great. I think if you've already got Trent, yes, he's maybe a bit too much money, the attack and returns will come. And like 15 is Everton away, Fulham at home, Southampton away, Leicester at home, West Ham away. These are fixtures I'd want him for. Not the Spurs game maybe, but the rest of them. But honestly, I feel like if you've held him like me, it's frustrating, but I think you've just got to let it go. I think missing the Southampton game is just not good enough when you're 7 million. You've got City and Newcastle away next. So I think for me, he's going to be a sell this week. Again, I'll talk about it from my own team perspective tomorrow. For anyone looking at who to transfer in, if you've got only one Arsenal defender or zero, I think getting an Arsenal defender is so obvious. I know they haven't kept clean sheets recently, but the fixtures coming up are pretty decent. I still back them as a top 2 defence in the league. So going to someone like Gabriel, who's already dropped to 6.1 million, and who knows, might drop again if people keep selling him, that just looks like such an obvious move to make. So if you've not got an Arsenal defender, that's where I would go. If you want to keep a similar structure and you want to back the Liverpool defence, then obviously you can bring in Konate, but I still quite like Van Dijk at 6.3. I think his goal threat is better than Konate. He's absolutely nailed on, although I appreciate Konate is pretty much nailed at this point as well. But Van Dijk's 6.3 now. Like, it doesn't feel right spending that much money on him, I gotta be honest. So I'd probably just go, I don't know. If going to Van Dijk lets you still have the team you want, then I think that's a good move. But I feel like that would still block too much stuff. I'd either go to Arsenal or just go down to Konate. After that, you're probably just buying a cheap defender, like a Colwill, Lewis Hall, 8 Nuri maybe, someone like that, a Brighton defender for their good fixture run. That is probably what I would do. But either way, I think he's probably got to be sold this week. Like even to the point where I'd be tempted to take a hit for some people, depending on what that hit is. Like, because once you go Trent to like a cheap defender, like let's just say you go for Colwill from Chelsea, who's a bit boring, I know, but Chelsea's fixtures are good. Like for me, that would leave 4.2 in the bank. That's a lot of money to have banked, even for like 1 or 2 game weeks. For some people, if you can do that and then go and get Saka in, I think I would probably do that. Yeah, Trent's got to go, unfortunately. It's frustrating. I've said that word about 4 or 5 times on this little section, but it is what it is, right? We've got to deal with injuries. They're going to happen again over the next few weeks, especially with the fixture congestion. Go down to a cheap defender, pump that money into attack. That's probably the way to go. So I'll just go through some of my notes from the weekend. Michael Keane was benched for Everton. As expected, at some point, Jared Branthwaite would come back in to partner Tarkowski and Michael Keane would come out of the team. So don't buy him if you were thinking about doing that, although I suspect not many of you were. If you have bought him recently, it's probably not a major issue because you probably picked him up at like 4 or 4.1 million. You can just leave him as your 5th defender and just deal with him as and when. He's not going to be a massive problem. I guess if you were intending to play him against Brentford at home in 12 or Wolves away in 14, then you should probably look to go elsewhere. But he's not going to be a priority transfer out. The fixtures coming up weren't great anyway, and it was always fairly obvious that at some point he would lose his place. I guess if he'd played really well, maybe Sean Dyche would have taken out Tarkowski instead, but that was really never that likely, I would say. Saka went off with an injury. Lots of people, of course, saying that it's just an international break injury, but it was 1-1 at the time against Chelsea. I'm not convinced that there's nothing wrong there. He's also pulled out of the England squad. So I think it's likely that Saka will be back for game week 12 and be fine and a good transfer in. But obviously don't bring him in early unless you absolutely have to. I just don't think it's worth taking the risk. And it's similar with Palmer. He's also pulled out of the England squad. He was seen limping after the Chelsea game. I don't think that's much of a surprise. He hadn't trained, as far as we know, very much, or if at all, before that Arsenal game. I guess he got through it because it was a important fixture. But we should wait for more news before we make any transfers around him. Again, I'm sure he'll just take these 2 weeks off now to get back up to fitness. And if we get reports next week that he's training, happy days. But if we get to next week and there's still slight doubts there, then obviously that might put you off captaining him if that's something you were thinking about. And if your transfer in this week was Palmer, you might have to rethink that. I suspect that for anyone planning to bring Palmer in, you'll still be doing that in 12, but just try and wait. Right? I know players are changing in price, but if Palmer ends up being out and you haven't got him, then you're one step ahead of everyone that does. So it's probably not worth early transfer. Garnacho benched and Dalot went off early as a sub. If you bought Dalot in recently, I think that's really, really unlucky. Like, some people might say that he's needed a bit of a rest for a while, and I get that, but he's also played so many 90 minutes that I don't think anyone would have expected him to come off that early. Should you be panicking as a Dalot owner going forward? No, I don't think so, because the next 2 fixtures are good. But as I've said for a week or so now, no one can tell you for certainty what that Man United team will look like under Amorim. I suspect that Onana will be in goal, Martinez will be the left centre-back if he's going to play a back 3, De Ligt will be in there, Fernandes will be in there, and Højlund will almost certainly be the number 9. Will Dalot be the right wing-back? Will it be Matsraoui? Whoever doesn't play as the right wing-back, will they play on the left? We just don't know. Will Dalot slot in as a right centre-back? Maybe, right? Maybe not when Yoro's fit, but he's not fit at the moment. So I wouldn't panic on Dalot. I think you just play him against Ipswich, hope that he's in the team, and then just reassess week by week once you see more from Amorim. With Garnacho again, I think you've maybe been a little bit unlucky. Basically, Amad Diallo played so well in Europe that he had to start again, and he also played well against Leicester too. So then you've got Garnacho versus Rashford. I guess you could say that there was always a risk of rotation there, but he had played a lot of 90 minutes in a row. Like, he pretty much was first choice under Ten Hag for a long time and looked to be the same under Ruud van Nistelrooy, although obviously that was a small sample of games. Under Amorim, I just don't know. So similar situation to Garnacho. It's Ipswich away. Unless there's any indication before that game that he's not going to start, you've probably got to keep him. And then just wait and see where he plays in that team and how Amorim sets up. If he's not in it, then obviously you just get rid. It's not worth the hassle. But Ipswich away is potentially such a good fixture that I'd look to keep him. In terms of buying, I would absolutely ignore him and go elsewhere. Arsenal, no clean sheet again. But I'm going to keep dying on this hill that they're a good option going forward. They've still put up pretty good numbers over the course of this year. The fixtures coming up are good. If you've still got them in your squad, this really is the wrong week to sell. It's just pointless. You might as well see it through now and hope that you get one against Forest, against the mighty Chris Wood. I would still bring him in as well. Like, for me, I think there's some situations where I see people selling players that I think are good. It just makes me want them more. Like, Raya might drop in price this international break. Gabriel's going to drop too, possibly. That means people are getting rid of players that I consider really good going forward. That would just make me want them more. So I think if you're considering bringing an Arsenal defender in, I back it. I think that's a good option. Vissa returns continue, and yet I barely ever mention him, and I've not considered him once bringing him into my team. His record's absolutely ridiculous. Like, 2 goals against Bournemouth, 1 goal, 1 assist against Ipswich in 9, 6 goals, 2 assists. He's only had 7 starts. Absolutely ridiculous. 6.1 is a good price. I'd probably continue to ignore him. I think Everton away, Leicester at home is good. But after that, the fixtures do get a bit trickier. Now, I'm not going to change what I've said before. I still don't think those fixtures are absolutely terrible for Brentford. And I think there's absolutely a case to be made to keep in BRUNO. But we're talking about buying new. Like, if there's a choice between João Pedro or Vissa, I'm saving that 0.7 million and going for the guy with much better fixtures over the next 6 game weeks. So if you've got Vissa, absolutely you're going to hold on to him. No questions whatsoever for the next 2 games at least. But in terms of buying him, I will continue to ignore him and probably continue to get punished for players like Strand Larsen. Watkins early sub. Bearing in mind that they were obviously trying to win the game, he got brought off. Rogers stayed on. Duran came on. I don't think that's necessarily an indication of what's going to happen moving forward, because we've seen him play 80 plus in a lot of games. But I still stand by the fact that I just don't think 9 million is good value for him. If you've got him, you probably want to keep him because the fixture in 12 is good. I just don't see any reason to buy Watkins. I'd much rather go for Isak, who's guaranteed on penalties, 0.6 million cheaper, doesn't have Champions League and stuff like that. And also, at the moment, doesn't have someone like Duran to come off the bench. Like, Wilson's there, but he's not fit yet. Watkins always has that Duran potential. So, I think if you've got Watkins, perfectly fine, hold. I definitely would not be buying him. And then for Chelsea, Pedro Neto's now played 390 minutes in a row. And a lot of Chelsea fans now saying even if he's not first choice on the right, he might be ahead of Madueke. Sorry, if he's not first choice on the left, he might even be ahead of Madueke on the right. I'm not sure that's definitely the case, to be honest, because Madueke's played quite a lot. Obviously, scoring against Arsenal and generally playing well is not going to be bad for your minutes going forward. For me, I would still absolutely ignore Pedro Neto. He's already on. He's had 5 starts, by the way. He's on 4 yellow cards, so he's 1 away from a suspension. At 6.2 million, he's potentially a really nice price, but he's taken up a midfield spot. So Salah, Saka, Palmer, you've got 2 others. Most people need someone cheap like Rogers. So you've got 1 more spot for like an Mbeumo, Fernandes or Neto. It ain't Neto for me. And also, I'll say this about any Chelsea player that's not Palmer or Jackson, you're nailed until you're not. It wasn't that long ago people were asking me about Jadon Sancho and whether they should bring him in. And obviously I think he missed the Man United game because he's on loan. He's a bit of a knock now as well. But his minutes just were never secure. And I don't necessarily think that Pedro Neto's are either. And I know people are going to tell me he's playing so well, how can you take him out of the team? Well, in the same way that people said that about Madueke, he's continued to play, but now some people think that Neto's ahead of him. So I just don't think Chelsea players outside of Palmer and Jackson are worth the headache, especially when they're on 4 yellow cards. So Neto just would not take up a midfield spot for me. I think he's a class player, but he's also not completely immune from picking up injuries. We've seen that plenty of times at Wolves. So not for me. And then Reece James, just forget about him. If you were thinking about him after 290 minutes in 9 and 10, the fact that he just got benched against Arsenal should put you off. He's not guaranteed to start. He's not guaranteed to stay fit. He's 4.9 million. If you want a Chelsea defender because of their fixtures, just buy Colwill or Fofana instead. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Rate 5 stars if you're listening on podcast. I might do one more video tomorrow talking about my team, which will probably just be one big ramble, as many videos are. And then that will probably be it till next week. So enjoy your international break. Don't make early transfers unless you absolutely have to. Give the video a like, hit that subscribe button, rate 5 stars on podcast, and I'll catch you again tomorrow, probably.